You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitski. This week we're joined by Dr. Alycia Halladay, Chief Science Officer at Autism Science Foundation and a leading voice in autism research. We'll discuss key advancements from 2024, resources for families, profound autism, and how siblings are impacted. Dr. Halladay will also share practical tips and insights to families raising autistic children. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Alycia Halladay.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be included on this.
Well, it's my pleasure. And one of the things that I love that we're going to get to talk about today is individualization and how we need to be thinking through every single thought on empowerment and on advocacy and on care through the lens of individualized care models. But before we go into that, I love to give a background to our audience on, what's the driving factor that brought your passion, that brought you into this field initially?
Well, you're going to be surprised to learn that before I got into autism research, I was a toxicologist. And one of the things that was kind of emerging at the time that I was doing a postdoctoral fellowship was the idea that mercury in vaccines was linked to autism. So I was working on one of two NIH EPA funded studies looking into that link back in 2000. So that was actually my first kind of introduction into autism. And as a result of that study, which included basic science and clinical research and, everything from exposure science, I was introduced to the field of autism and then actually decided I wanted to become more involved in it beyond toxicology and joined the National Alliance for Autism Research in 2005, which then became Autism Speaks. And then in 2014, I joined the Autism Science Foundation. And then as I'm hearing from, other people along this journey, I started out as a scientist, but in 2013, my daughter was diagnosed with autism on the spectrum. So I think there's many stories like that may not get heard.
No, absolutely. And I mean, that interconnectedness of where somebody's passion originally starts to how much they can really put into that for where their current interests and passions really are driving right now. I think that's brought about a lot of the discovery in the field. I think it's brought about a lot of the advocacy and change in the field. And these changes occur year after year after year. I feel like we're always learning and evolving and getting better. In 2024 alone, there's been a lot of advancements. What is it that you've seen that we're now talking about or that we're now prioritizing that's relatively new or is being thought about differently right now?
Yeah, so one of the main things that's really flummoxed scientists and clinicians is the broad spectrum of autism, right? So with everything that you talked about, new scientific advances, new changes in diagnostic criteria, there are changes in the way that we conceptualize autism, right? So there are individuals like my daughter who are super smart, who are very verbal, who are in mainstream classrooms. But there are also individuals who are not able to be accommodated in a mainstream classroom that may be serviced even under a Medicaid waiver because their medical needs exceed what the typical insurance plans could even accommodate. So there's a wide spectrum, and it's been very, very hard for clinicians and support systems to accommodate everyone because everyone is different. So, and you can say everyone is different, but it really is in practice where you think about autism, where you have individuals who are extremely gifted, are verbal, who can live independently, who have, obviously social struggles or maybe some executive function problems, to individuals who cannot even be left alone for 15 minutes, right? So they need constant 24-hour supervision. They may not be verbal. They may exhibit self-injury or other aggressive behaviors where they need constant supervision and support. So trying to make sense of trying to find help for people with autism under that big umbrella has been not just challenging, but it's really been detrimental to those on, wherever you land on the spectrum, right? Because, there's this assumption that this whatever is out there will work for everyone with autism, and that's just not true, and it's unfair to
Mhm.
expect that to be true. So there's been more and more movement, even in this past year, about better defining a subgroup, or a label called profound autism. And these are individuals who are minimally verbal or non-speaking, or they have an intellectual disability, a severe intellectual disability, about 50 or below. Usually someone has an intellectual disability if they have an IQ of 70. So this gives you a sense that this is a really severe cognitive impairment, and also need 24/7 care. So there's been greater advances in kind of understanding that group, what their specific needs are, and then how their basic neurobiology is different, so that we can think about, okay, this is somebody that has these particular needs. We need to serve them, and we need to serve them in a way that's different from individuals who don't have profound autism. Now, that being said, we have profound autism and non-profound autism. Within that non-profound autism, there could also be distinct groups that we don't kind of have a handle on yet with specific needs. That's not to say we're not doing that. This is the first step, maybe in many, of getting to what different groups of people need and how we can serve them better. Because, clearly the needs of someone who is living independently and holding a job, maybe getting some assistance, but not relying on 24/7 assistance, is clearly different, and not better than or less than. It's different, and we just needed to acknowledge that. And this year, there's been some remarkable research that's been able to address that. And then the other thing is that we're better starting to understand family factors, right? So this isn't just, the individual with autism and how they're affected. It's really the whole family, right? And I'm not just talking about the psychological impact. Families that are affected with autism, there's something underlying, we can talk about the different genetics there, but there's some sort of underlying common factor that increases the likelihood of mental health issues, developmental issues, language, and we're finding that occurs not just in parents, but siblings, and then even second degree family members like cousins or aunts and, or nieces and nephews. And so, acknowledging them and acknowledging that this affects the entire family, and we need to provide support for the entire family, is literally, something that I think seems obvious. I mean, to me, it seems obvious, but I don't think that it's been necessarily fully recognized.
Yeah, and I think part of the criticism of autism care is due to the fact that it is such a broad spectrum, and policy might be built off of a generalization versus an individualization of need. So I mean, it's got to be difficult to resource if you don't know, and you have this profound autism, and I'd say subgroup that is going to need additional supports, or maybe it's different supports and layers of that. And then you might have those that need just maybe some focused support, social support, components that are going to allow them to be more empowered in the workforce, more empowered during their schooling environment. Those are two very different resources,
Yeah.
different funding cycles, and you have payers, legislators, everything trying to figure out, how do I budget for this? How do I figure it out? It's got to be
Yeah.
hard.
It has got to be hard, and there's probably a need to have an updated. A few years ago, maybe many years ago, there was a kind of a study that looked at the financial impact of having a family member with autism, both with and without intellectual disability. And there's clearly a difference there,
Mhm.
that those with intellectual disabilities have higher levels of support needs that cost more money. There's probably a need to kind of update that. Um, but it is very, very hard. And clearly the needs of someone, and whether or not how you predict that, right? So, whether you can say at age 10, this person is going to need this amount of services or this amount of support or what, can be very tricky. I think we have to prepare for the worst in terms of budgeting, right? I mean, I think that's my bottom line, is that when you think about financial needs, you prepare for the worst and hope for the best, right? So that way, honestly, in that mindset, which is my own opinion, not necessarily the opinion of a funding agency, but if you prepare for the worst and say, okay, I need this amount of money in the federal budget to help people on this level, then you can be prepared. On the other hand, we don't want to underestimate, just because those with an intellectual disability we recognize now may need, typically more money. There may be more specific supports that are under recognized right now, or under determined, or even understood, misunderstood, that required specific supports. You mentioned employment, and I think that's a great way to start. So somebody who is able to get a competitive job in the competitive workplace and earn, a competitive wage, is going to need some supports, right, with autism, whether that's preparing for an interview, that's job retention, that's ways to support the general workforce for them to get better, to have better understanding in the workforce for people that are neurodivergent. That is absolutely necessary, but that is much different than somebody who's going to need more of a supported employment, or even more of a sheltered workshop model, where they have, an employment situation set up for them. They have an aide that sits with them to help them get their work done. They may not earn $60,000, $70,000 a year, because that interferes with their Social Security benefits anyway. So, there's the careful balance and the need for prediction. I absolutely agree, and that's why research is so needed. But at the same time, we have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Does that affect, and I do want to get to more of the unique needs of profound autism, but prior to going there, I have one more question just on the advocacy efforts, because I would think that if I was experiencing this with family members, or was neurodivergent myself, and I was being told that this is the one size fits all care model for autism, is that having these subgroups, which you're working on, helps to really break down the understanding for everybody that, not everyone needs this exact model of care, is that there are different models that better suit different subgroups, and then you individualize within that. And it makes the awareness and acceptance and advocacy so much easier, because now you're not talking about this huge kind of broad nature of autism. You're talking about more unique subsets as you're advocating. Is that something that's been a push and pull in the industry?
It has, and I'm going to tell you a personal story, which I don't want to make this about me, but there has been this thought that autism should be under one umbrella, and that if you move people towards subgroups, that it's akin to saying this person is worth less or worth more. And that's just simply not the case. That's not the goal of a label. The goal is to make sure everyone gets the supports that they need. So my personal story, when my daughter was diagnosed in 2013, I had her, the school system evaluated her and said she doesn't have, she's fine. She's fine. Okay. Everyone else is telling me she's not fine. So I took her in for a private evaluation, and they and by, really good, I want to say I totally trust the people that did the evaluation, and said she's on the autism spectrum. So then I go back to the school, and they literally said to me, they go, well, she doesn't need to be put in a special classroom. And I said, that's not what I'm asking for. They said, well, she, we think that she could do pretty well academically. I said, I agree. I don't want her in a special, I don't want her moved to, a special school. But here we are, with a misunderstanding by the school system about what autism is and isn't, that's impacting those with non-profound autism. So it goes both ways. It's not just about providing the right supports for those with profound autism. It's about making sure that those with non-profound autism get the supports that they need, and that there isn't this one size bucket fits all. Okay, if somebody has an autism diagnosis or some other sort of diagnosis, I mean, the codes for IEPs are different, that they just get shuttled to a special needs school. That is important for a lot of people, but it's not essential for everyone. A lot of people with autism do great in a mainstream school with an aide or a support person, and putting them in a special needs school is not the right thing for everyone. It is for a lot of people, and that should be an option. But
Mhm.
as much as people fear the profound label because they think that it takes away for people who don't have profound autism, the fact is that it provides clarity. I think that's a good term, is clarity for those who aren't on the profound autism end of the scale.
Absolutely. And it helps to tailor that care a little bit more, and to help educate those maybe in a school district to say, you know what, when somebody has this unique skill set or these unique needs, I need to make sure those resources are available to them as well. I need to make sure that every single person has the chance to be able to benefit from this environment.
Yeah.
But let's talk about profound autism, because I've seen the other end of that where, you have somebody that isn't getting empowered in their environment because you don't have all the right resources, or you're saying that, well, this person shouldn't need this level of care going forward. We need to have them sit in the back of a classroom and not participate just to be included. And it's like, well, let's talk deeper on that and let's figure that out. But what are the unique needs that you're seeing with profound autism that maybe we need to be a little bit more cognizant of?
Yeah. So I think the the individuals with profound autism, these are not individuals. I think we have a media representation that's a little bit unbalanced in terms of what autism is, right? So, we love to watch the show Young Sheldon. Young Sheldon probably is on the spectrum. My daughter loves the show The Good Doctor. He's obviously on the spectrum, right? But those are not career options or trajectories that are typical for everyone with autism. However, because that's how they're represented in the media, that's what people think autism is. People think that only environmental, like the only thing that people with autism need is greater acceptance and more accommodations, which those things can be true. And there are individuals with autism that have really severe medical issues. People with profound autism are more likely to have co-occurring medical conditions like pica, which is just eating things, or
Mhm.
self-injury, or aggression, which if you are a petite 5 foot mom, petite mom, and then your son is aggressive and 250 pounds and 6 feet, it can be a real problem. Um, and uh, just the level of care that's needed. It's not just, a check-in every once in a while. Someone has to sit with that person and make sure they're not self-harming, make sure they're taking their medication, making sure if they have a seizure, they don't fall and crack their head open.
Mhm.
These sorts of conditions and issues specifically affect those with profound autism. If you have an intellectual disability, you may not be able to make decisions like what kind of medical care you receive, right? You need the help of someone who can provide that, to be that person to make those decisions, to drive you to the doctor, to make those medical decisions, to
Mhm.
make those choices. You may not be able to. Um, so I think that it's not, again, I want to reinforce that this isn't less than, it's distinct from, and
Yeah.
the challenges are distinct from,
Hmm.
not that nobody considers these people less than. In fact, parents of people with profound autism feel that they have a much higher, in general, this is anecdotal, a much, that not only, they feel a greater sense of responsibility to their children because they don't feel that other people are going to be able to look out for them, and they really can't look out after themselves.
No, absolutely. And one of the things that I always try and look at personally is everything should be in the view of empowerment. And in order to empower somebody is that you're going to always have to look at how can I be able to support the environment around them to be successful, the skill sets around them to be successful, the people around them to be successful, so that somebody has the chance to be able to contribute in the way that they want to or in the best of their ability. So when you're looking at, and I guess I'll put this into context of maybe some of the state plans that are out there where they would be putting like an arbitrary statement saying, okay, well, at this age, I'm no longer going to be offering that level of support for somebody to continue to thrive in the environment and to contribute and be
Yeah.
more independent. Are those sorts of things the barriers right now that you're saying, by having a profound autism label, we need to be looking at the medical needs and medical necessity differently for some of the individuals to say we can't have arbitrary caps. We can't have arbitrary decisions based off of a general model of autism.
Yeah, I think I would argue against arbitrary caps in general. So I just want to say that I come from that perspective. But I want to first qualify this. ASF has its own podcast, and one of the guests was this week was Elaine Clark, who talks about adaptive behavior across people, which is like includes daily living skills and how do people communicate and are they able to express their own needs and things like this. That what a good outcome is not going to be uniform, right? So for some people, working a couple hours a week in some sort of supported employment environment and having some friends that live in a residential facility and and being able to do group activities, that's their community and that's what is a good quality of life for them. For other people, having a relationship or like a romantic relationship and having a full-time job, those things, that is what constitutes a happy life. So I think that part of this conversation should be, making sure that we recognize that what a happy life is. And I know as a parent, this is what parents deal with all the time, right? Like in general, regardless of your child's whatever, is that you kind of automatically think that what's best for you is best for your child. And this is just a ubiquitous thing. I don't care that like, oh, you'll never earn money as an artist, so you shouldn't pursue your love of art. Like, I think that that's just like a general thing. But I think that as the community, we can't be imposing what we think is a good outcome or what we think somebody's life should look like on other people. So in that way, so that's the first thing, is that we can't be putting these kind of arbitrary decisions about like, well, unless they have a full-time job, then this therapy isn't working. Or unless they have, unless there's an amelioration of all of the aggressive behavior over a 3-week time point, then this therapy is a failure, right? Like, so I think, and I understand that the basis of these decisions are to make sure that everybody, theoretically, the basis is to make sure that like people aren't just doing something that doesn't work forever, that there's some sort of guidance about what works and what should be working and what we can measure as, a good outcome. But unfortunately, what a good outcome is not going to be the same for everyone. So I think that makes an argument against, arbitrary limits in terms of like, how much care someone gets or what type of care they get, whether that's behavioral intervention, whether that's medication, whether that's, a medical intervention like ECT, whatever that is. I think we have to rely on the science. And unfortunately, a lot of I could go on and on, but some of these arbitrary decisions are not even made by clinicians who have any experience with autism. So
absolutely,
get off my soapbox.
Sorry. No, but it brings up a very good point, is when you're looking at treatment, when you're looking at outcomes, when you're looking at anything, it should be person-centered and it should be focused on the quality of life. I think it's how do you make sure that you're constantly contributing to a better quality of life for the individual, those that are around them, and that there is some progress, but it's not a progress on an assessment tool that's standardized to say, did they improve their IQ? Did they improve certain standards? Those are valuable just for guidance, but the quality of life is probably one of the more important things to know, is that is the treatment contributing to more positive for this individual? Is that kind of when you're looking at profound autism? And I'm going to talk more about maybe the adult that doesn't have as much community access right now as far as being out into the environment and being independent, but maybe is learning new skills and developing friendships that are enriching their lives in other ways. Is quality of life the indicator that you'd be looking at there?
So yeah, this is a complex question. So I'm going to answer it in two parts. One, there are goals in research, right? So when we do research study, maybe maybe we're looking for an intervention or a support or, some sort of indicator about, number of words spoken by a certain age, right? Or number of words someone can complete in a sentence, or number of times someone makes eye contact. I'm just throwing these things out. Those are good research tools, right? So, but they don't necessarily, and they're helpful, right? But I think that they're too nuanced to say, okay, someone needs to be making this number, like they're not really real life solutions, right? So they should be used as markers. They should be continued to be used as markers. These are what we call more proximal things. The distal things are what you mentioned, which is, according to themselves and a caregiver or a family member, are they happier? Are they more involved in whatever they define as their community? Are they active? Are they not just sitting around languishing somewhere? Are they involved in an activity that they like? So those, yes, are some of the things that we should be including, and there are measurements for that. I mean, there's something called adaptive behavior, which I think I mentioned, and it's not great for everything, but it's what people are using, right? So, are they able to have conversations? Do they have conversations with their peers or just with adults? Are they able to stay on task with topics? All of these things can contribute to whether or not they live a good quality of life. Quality of life is kind of like a big term, right? So, because even if you have autism, you can have these complex medical problems that diminish your quality of life, right? So, maybe the treatment isn't for autism, maybe the treatment is for gastrointestinal problems or seizures or something like that. So it's kind of tricky to say like what we're doing to improve quality of life, because that's broad, but where that leads you, I think is really important. But, there are tools that I don't want to diminish the tools that researchers use when they do research studies, because they really are important. But when you're talking about, looking at, and I'm just going to comment on whether or not an insurance payer should be paying for a specific treatment. It should be based on multiple things, including whether or not that person is living a good life, however you want to define that, in
No.
many different dimensions.
No, absolutely. And that's why like all of this is you have to take numerous different sources and you have to be able to try and figure out. And it's individualized. You're going
Yeah.
to be looking at every single thing so differently. Is that if you're working with somebody who one of the primary goals for that individual is to be able to kind of have more language, to be more social, to be able to improve that quality of their life, then yes, I'm going to be looking at language output. I'm going to be looking at, can I be able to establish more of that? But it's got to be individualized in how you're tailoring your treatment. With profound autism, and you and I had a chance to talk earlier, but it's age 8 is kind of that cutoff for being able to identify and label with profound autism for a variety of reasons. And I'll hopefully you can be able to explain that to the group. But one of the things that I'd love to be able to hear after you're able to kind of give us that breakdown of profound autism is what resources maybe are a little bit unique as somebody gets older that's that should be incorporated into somebody's life or thought about to be incorporated into somebody's individual plan so that they're not just sitting around in a group environment, not knowing how to engage and not supported to be able to be a part of the fun and a part of the community that they're involved with. But let's start with defining of that kind of how do we get to profound autism?
Yeah, so the reason why the label of profound autism starts at age 8 is because there's so much behavioral malleability, there's so much plasticity that goes on in a young brain, right? So constantly forming, even after you're born, you're forming new neurons in your brain. Those neurons are making connections with other neurons and developing networks for thinking and processing and speaking and developing language and all of those other things. And so there's so much that could happen before age 8 that right now the common the scientific field has said at age 8 is when you can reliably put that label of profound autism on. Now that may change. We're certainly hoping that that with science and these studies, which are able to track kids past, from infancy all the way up until, adolescence and adulthood, which they do exist, that those studies can provide maybe a clearer picture of when a profound label can be diagnosed. But right now it's age 8. So even if your child isn't on the profound trajectory, the number one thing is to be prepared. So it's almost like you're constantly playing catch up. So as your child is in elementary school, preparing them for the curriculum in middle school, and then in middle school, preparing them for the curriculum in high school. And when they're in high school, preparing them for what's going to happen once they graduate. And that can be anything from, thinking about residential options, whether they're going to be living at home and how that's going to work, or whether they're going to be living in a residential facility or a group home and how they're going to adapt to that. What their employment prospects look like, whether, they can go to college. If you have profound autism, probably not, but maybe. But how you prepare someone for the college experience, or what sort of job skills do you prepare them for, right? I mean, it may be making T-shirts, it may be delivering office supplies, it may be, food preparation. All of those things to prepare them needs to happen a little bit earlier than you would maybe think about for people with profound autism. And then unfortunately, there are not enough resources for people with profound autism. I mean, there really aren't for autism, but for profound autism, there are literally not enough beds in hospitals for inpatient stays. There's not enough rooms in residential facilities. There's not enough aides that can provide that one-on-one support for people with profound autism. There's, not enough jobs really, if that, so there's really not enough out there. And so, getting prepared in terms of being put on waiting lists or, working with social workers to get yourselves into the right programs is really important. I know people who have moved from state to state because of differences in access to services. So, literally just being 3 steps ahead instead of 2 steps ahead, I think is really critical. And then, just like as any child ages, the needs of those children as they become adults are going to age, right? So like when you think of like your 5 and 6-year-old, you don't think about whether or not they're going to have a romantic partner. Well, guess what? When they're 16, 17, and 18, you need to not only think about that, but think about whether or not, are they going to be having sex and what that means. You have to think as girls go through puberty, you have to think about how they're going to manage things like getting their period, right? Or going, to different doctors. You have to think about what sorts of medical issues may emerge. Sometimes, as the brains age, people are finding that dementia is you're at a higher risk for things like dementia. So how do you, kind of prepare for that? Or how do you anticipate that? Or how do you think about that? So it occurs way earlier than I think any parent is prepared to.
Yeah, I mean, the stress on a parent trying to navigate all of that, just knowing that the clinical resources haven't even caught up to being able to provide all that. It's got to be a lot on a family. And I mean, what sort of feedback have you gotten, or what sort of need have you heard for parents and siblings specifically on what this unique experience might feel like?
Yeah, so parents, there have actually been studies in parents that have asked, like, what do you need? Emily Ferguson from Stanford recently published a study that asked parents, what do they need? And actually, they say they need more of everything, right? They don't have access to the doctors. There are so few and far between that have expertise in what they need that they don't have the right medical care. They also don't have the right accommodations, right? Like, you know, whether or not they can go to, certain states and certain associations and organizations like the Autism Society of San Francisco and the Bay Area has amazing opportunities. They create opportunities for people with profound autism to go to a public pool, to go to the ballet, to go to a music performance. Not everybody has that. And that's something that families are saying, talk about community integration. I can't even take my child out to a restaurant, right? And then the stigma associated with it. I think people are more apt to consider awkward but odd than, tantruming, self-biting, aggression, non-speaking, and grunting and pointing rather than using words. They're definitely feeling the specific stigma of that, and even the stigma of oh, my child lives in a residential facility. There's a stigma associated with that, even though that could be where they're living their best life.
Yeah.
So there's definitely those, and then even access to services that people think should be reserved for those for non-profound autism, like social skills interventions, right, or social skills groups. So there's an assumption that people with profound autism don't maybe need that. Well, because they're normally set up for people with higher IQ or those that are able to form community connections outside, their immediate community. And they don't have access to that and would like to have access to that. So, access or help, there just really isn't anywhere. And I think that, I think a lot of it boils down to expertise, and then also the right level of training, even if you're not a child psychiatrist, right? The right level of training for an aide, the right level of training for, a healthcare provider, a nurse, or somebody in the clinic. Emergency rooms are a big one, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of times families take their kids to emergency rooms because they don't know where else to turn. The emergency rooms aren't great places either for people with autism. And so even, making sure that there's trained personnel in emergency rooms to help them is a huge priority.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about profound autism, you gave some of the examples of things that could occur, which would be severe self-injury. It could be aggression. You could have somebody that maybe is more of a flight risk as far as wandering in the community. And these are big deals, and it's a matter of not just having the community support, but the professional support that exists around that as well. And I could see the stigma is that if I were a parent and my child was aggressive, I'd constantly be on edge taking them into the community, just not knowing what might happen and what might be looked at. Or if I have bruises because I've been supporting my child, it's having to explain that. And the more we educate the community around us to help them realize that, the supports are there and this is just another person experiencing life slightly different. And we all need to be there as part of that care model. I think it helps, but it's still going to be there. The stigma will still be hard for a family to break through. Um, so those supports aren't always there right now. And you talked about cities maybe having some more supports, but I know rural areas probably don't have a lot still. So, what is the benefit for some of these families as far as being able to say, I might not be getting all of the resources I need right now, but if I'm contributing back to more research, more information, is that over time people will start understanding my situation, my child a little bit better, and maybe policies would change? Is there a benefit for contributing into the research process right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so. The first thing is I want to address is that just the term profound autism and putting a name on it, part of the goal of that is to destigmatize it, right? Because if you put everything under the broad umbrella of autism, you're going to have so much confusion by the community about what that means. No one's going to understand anyone's specific kind of impairments or strengths or whatever. So you're going to have to put a name on it. And that's part of what using the words profound autism is doing, is to destigmatize it in a way, and saying like, this is, you should respect those with non-profound autism, but the needs are a little bit different for those with profound autism. And clearly, the reason why we're able to provide supports for any person with autism, evidence-based supports, is through science and research, right? We know certain things work and certain things don't work. We know certain medications work and don't work. We know biological targets better now than we did 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. So that research is helping to inform better medicine, better interventions, better supports. And that's what the whole purpose of science and research is, right? Is to not say, oh, go ahead and try this, or this may or may not work. We actually want evidence for it. And maybe it works in this group of people with autism, but not this group of people with autism. And maybe better recognition of the different subgroups will help clarify that.
Yeah, and that research that you all have been working on has helped to guide the field in very positive directions as the years have gone on, and informing away from decisions that maybe aren't in the best interest of an individual. Or like you said, you started out on the vaccination study. It's helping to re-inform the public on things that maybe were misguided initially, and helping them to realize that, some of the stuff that came out as science a long time ago maybe didn't have the value of what it is today, and we need to rethink it. Is that there isn't that correlation between vaccines and autism, and but without the research, you don't get there, and without having a defined group, it's very tough to research. And so I appreciate all the work that y'all are doing. So how can families connect with the ASF, and how do they stay up to date on research? It's constantly moving. So how do you suggest that we stay up to date?
Yeah, so we have a website and we have a regular newsletter that goes out, and I also have a podcast. So I know there's multiple podcasts and only so many hours in the day. I try to keep mine short, so you're in and out quickly with some of the new news, but there seems to always be, in this age of electronic information, just a deluge all the time of information and misinformation, right? So as many times as the truth will come out, there'll be 10 kind of variations on the truth, and we see that all the time on different social media platforms. So ASF really, we focus on science and research and what science can help the community. So you can always go to our website. We're always kind of updating it and trying to keep it up to date in terms of, I'm hearing about new things every day. Somebody asked me about this thing called zeolite minerals, right? So these are compounds that are found in cat litter and thought to be detoxes. I had never heard of this before. So somebody brought it to my attention and I heard of it. Doesn't work. Put it on the website. This doesn't work. There's no evidence base for it. On the other hand, there's strong evidence base for other interventions that we highly support the insurance coverage of and the prescription for, and the training of, and that includes, behavioral interventions, speech and language therapies, pharmacological therapies when medical interventions like ECT when indicated. So, we try to be a clearinghouse, knowing that you're getting thrown information all over the place. So we're on social media, we have a website, we have a podcast. And so I invite your listeners to check us out and to contact us. We have a contact us at autismsciencefoundation.org. If you have a question, or if something just doesn't seem right to you, or you're hearing something that you think may be promising, where can you go? You can always reach out to us.
I mean, that's such a valuable resource. And I appreciate your time today too, Alycia. I know that you're extremely busy, but coming out and being able to help inform me as well as others, I think that's something that is definitely appreciated. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for covering this topic. And thank you for having me on. I really look forward to connecting with your listeners if they want to contact us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.